Four ways you can overcome your grief today. So, back in 2021, when the pandemic was at its peak, I had a few clients that unfortunately lost loved ones. And one client I had in particular was a middle aged guy. He was disabled, and his wife was actually his caretaker. She did everything for him. And I remember when I got a call from his mom that my patient, so the client I was working with, that he was going through some tough things. And she eventually later explained that his wife was basically on life support, right? They had the ventilators and all those things going on. And it was a real tough time. They didn't know if she was going to pull through, if she wasn't. And what was tough about this was that this was about the time where the vaccines were created. So you had the option of taking the vaccine and, maybe having some complications. I had some friends, some people that I know that had complications with the vaccine, but nonetheless, everyone had a choice to take it. And as you know, it did become a little political with that whole scenario. But nonetheless, his wife unfortunately decided not to take the vaccine. And she got sick, and she got really sick really fast. And I remember talking to my client as his wife was in the ICU and how much he was really just going through it, how tough it was for him. And I remember I got the call that she passed. And it was by far one of the toughest moments I ever had as a therapist, having to experience a man go through a grief situation so instant, so unexpected like that. And it was tough for me as a therapist emotionally to go through that with him. And it was tough for me to go through that in terms of helping him with the skills, the strategies, because grief is by far one of the toughest emotions us as humans will go through. And the sad thing is that all of us will go through a time of grieving. And it's a tough period. It's a period that we all will go through. So there is a lot of support. There's a lot of empathy that goes behind it. But nonetheless, it is something that's very uncomfortable. And what I'm going to do in this podcast is I'm going to give you guys the same steps that I gave him to help him to go through that process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys 4 steps. And if you take action on these 4 steps, it will help you to get through your grieving process a lot easier. So with that being said, go ahead and hit the subscribe button right now so you get more tips like this. And with that, let's go ahead and jump into point number 1. So I think it's very important to go over the stages of grief. Now, before I go into the stages of grief, I want to also say that the stages of grief are not linear, meaning they're not a straight line. A lot of people can go to stage 1, or some people even skip stage 1 of grief and find themselves in stage 3, and then they may go back to stage 1, then they go back to stage 5, and then they just go back and forth. They kind of just bounce around. So I don't want you guys to think that it's a linear process, and that once you pass one step, you will no longer go back to that previous step. That is not the case, okay? Grief is a very complex thing, and people go through grief their own way, all right? There's no single way of going through grief. But what I will do is give you guys the stages of grief. So there's 5 stages. The first stage is the denial phase. This phase is where it's tough for people to accept or to really believe that their loved one has passed. You may have seen this in movies as well, where you see someone maybe get a phone call that their son, their wife, their husband, someone has died in a car crash. And they may say, "Are you sure you have the right number? Are you sure it's my son? Are you sure it's my husband?" And they say yes. And when they go to the hospital, when they go to the coronary office, when they finally see the person that they love has passed, it then hits them. But for a lot of people, they stay in that denial phase because it's such a big shock. And it's because it's so new. It's so unexpected, if you will. So that's the first stage, denial. The second stage is anger. So for a lot of people, they find themselves angry at themselves. Or this may sound selfish, but even angry at the person that passed. It's like, how could you leave me at a time like this? How could you leave me with all the bills to pay? Or how could you leave me with all the kids to raise? Or, how could you just leave me in general? And that leaves a lot of people angry. And again, they find themselves angry at themselves because they feel like they should have said more. They should have done more. They have this resentment because the last conversation they had with them wasn't the most meaningful and wasn't the most kindness, if you will. So now they're carrying this grief with them. So the second stage is anger. The third stage is bargaining. So in this stage, a lot of people start to almost like try to make a deal with some type of higher power. Sometimes we see this even when the person is in the process of passing. So they may be in hospice, where someone says, "God, if you bring this person through, if you heal my cousin, if you heal my aunt, if you heal my grandma, I will give my life to you. I will no longer commit these bad deeds. I won't fall into these addictions. I won't have any bad habits. I'm going to be the nicest person on this planet." people start making these types of bargainings, these type of deals with some type of higher power as a way to retrieve that person or get that person back. And what this does is it keeps you in this stuck place of not being able to accept what has happened. So once a person goes through the bargaining stage, they then go into the depression stage. And this is a stage that obviously a lot of people find themselves in. They find themselves feeling just so distraught, so down, so heartbroken that it's hard for them to whether eat, go out and even just socialize, to be honest, or even handle the real tasks, the big tasks in their life, like going to work, if you will, or even taking care of their health. These things become magnified. These things become huge mountains for them to cross, to climb. And it's real tough because all along they're not in the best place mentally or physically, and this grief is just almost like sucking the life out of them, and that's really hard for them. And that's why these 4 steps I'm gonna go over is just so crucial. And then the last step, the last stage, is acceptance. So eventually we all get to a place of being able to allow the reality to be the reality. And that's going to be something I'm going to talk a little bit about in these 4 steps. But it's something that is a ending point, if you will, right? It's the end of the 5 stages. And even in that stage, I would tell you that you will still experience some pain. And that pain that you experience by your loved one being gone is proof that there was love there, okay? And that's the price we pay for love. Grief is the price you pay for love. I want you guys to remember that. So with that being said, step number 1, the first thing that I need you to do to help you to overcome your grief is to acknowledge your grief. You know, for a lot of people, they do stay in that denial phase. They don't talk about it. They don't want to believe it. They don't, and this is the tough part, they don't visit the gravesite of their loved one. Because when they do that, it becomes real to them. And that realness, they feel as though it'll be so tough that they won't be able to handle it. But I will tell you that you do have it within you to handle this. Trust me, because I've seen it for so many other people, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down some steps in this first step. So you're going to acknowledge your grief. And the first way I have my clients do this, the first way that I want you to do this is I want you to write a letter to your loved one that has passed. I want you to write as if they're sitting in that chair right next to you. Tell them all the things that you would like to tell them, especially if you felt that your loved one was lost unexpectedly. You didn't have time to speak to them, talk to them, tell them that you love them. This is your time to do this. What this does is it gives you a safe space to actually express yourself without feeling judged, without being looked bad upon. And this may sound a little counterintuitive, but without receiving help or being told that it's going to be okay. Because even that can feel like it backfires for a lot of people. When people are giving you the sympathy, the empathy, they're saying, "Oh man, I'm so sorry for your loss." Like for some people, it's hard for them to hear that because they're still, as I said, in this denial phase. And hearing someone say that they're sorry for your loss, it brings them to a reality that they're not ready to accept. So the first step here, within the first step, is to write a letter. The second step is now to share that letter with a close one. Now, what I do tell my clients is that, hey, I can be that first close one. If you haven't thought about seeing a therapist, you should go see a therapist to talk about your grief. We are bound by confidentiality, and we're not going to judge you. So do this, and you will start to feel a sense of fresh air. You'll feel like you can breathe just a little bit because now you're able to express how you're feeling. And then that third step, as I said earlier, I want you to visit the gravesite. I want you to go there, and you can actually read this letter while you're at that gravesite to actually talk to the person that you've lost. Guys, one of the best things you can do is to keep that memory of that person alive. And one of the best ways you can do that is by going to their gravesite, by making it a regular thing where you still visit them as if they're still alive. Main point number 2 to help you to overcome your grief, and this is a great one that I use for a lot of my clients, and they've told me that they've really received a lot of help with this, almost just as much or maybe even more help from my sessions. So this one is very, very powerful. But step number 2 is I want you to find a community that focuses on grief. Now, this community could be one that you find in person. So you can go to tons of websites. You can even just Google grief communities near me, and you'll be able to find one. If you see a therapist, you can ask them, can they send you some? And it's so easy, guys. But also, we live in 2024. Guys, a lot of these communities are online. You can actually Google on Facebook or whatever site you want to use, but Facebook is a good one. Go to Facebook, type in grief groups, and you will find dozens, if not hundreds, of grief groups where people just like you are experiencing things like grief, and you can hear the stories of people that have gone through the process already, and they will encourage you that there is hope at the end of the tunnel. So right now you may be in stage 1, right? The denial phase. So maybe you find yourself in stage 2 where you're angry. You can get into that group and find someone that is in stage 5, someone that maybe, let's say 10 years past the death date of a loved one. And they can tell you, hey, it's hard. It's going to seem impossible at times. But trust me when I say there is light at the end of the tunnel. Those stories are sometimes even more helpful than the advice that you get from a loved one, a therapist, or even your pastor, right? Like all these people that you're looking to for help, hearing the stories of someone that has gone through what you're going through is very, very powerful. So I want you guys to find a Facebook community. And this community, again, you can actually just sit in it and be anonymous for a couple months and just read some of the posts. And then what I would tell you is to start to engage those posts little by little. So what I would tell you to do is start liking the posts. Leave a little comment saying thank you. And then you can start posting your own stuff, whether it's anonymous. So you can leave a post anonymously and say, hey guys, I'm having a real tough day because it's the anniversary of my loved one's death. Does anyone have any help? You can also ask in that Facebook group, does anyone know of any books that I can read that focuses on grief that has helped you in the past? That would be a killer. That would be an amazing, right? An amazing resource that you can get. And trust me when I say, if you join a group that has thousands of people in it, which there are, man, you're going to get so many answers that you're going to be overwhelmed, but overwhelmed in a good way. So step number 2, make sure you guys find a community, because far too often I see people try to climb Mount Everest, right? So they try to deal with these really tough things alone. And that's a surefire way to fail. Main point number 3, and I gotta admit, I love this third point, and I love it because it gets you emotional in a good way. It serves as like this connection as well that you can have with the person that you've lost. Because far too often when people lose a loved one, they think that that's the end of their story, but it doesn't have to be. And you can keep that story alive. So main point number 3 is to simply honor their lives. And I'm gonna give you guys 3 ways that you can do that. Now, why do we want to honor our loved ones? Well, we want to show respect that the life that they live, the time we spent together with them was so amazing that we want to keep this memory, we want to keep this thought of them alive, if you will. And that's something that we see, honestly, with a lot of great people that has passed. One of them that just comes to mind is Martin Luther King. If you go to Atlanta, you can go to a lot of places, but if you go to Atlanta, you can go to his house that he grew up in, but also they have a section in the Civil Rights Museum that you go, you can see his journals, his watches, his clothes, like so many things that were personal to him. And this is how America, honestly, the world just honors someone who was great, someone that has passed, was, had their life taken away from them tragically. We can do that same exact thing. And they don't have to be this huge, like, person, if you will, like Martin Luther King. They can be anybody. They're big in our eyes, though. And that's why we want to do this. So one of the first things that you can do is start to have memorials, if you will. So what is like a memorial? So a memorial is kind of like a tradition that you have, right? It's something that you may do on the anniversary of their death, or you could do on the anniversary of their birthday, right? What you would do is you could either go to their gravesite and lay flowers. You can have something in your house. So this could be their bedroom. It could be a place where you have a picture of them, right? Whatever it is, you can go to that and you can start to speak to them. Have a little like ritual that you may do, like laying flowers, lighting incense, whatever it is. Maybe it's a Bible verse that you would like to read, like whatever it is that you feel will help you to honor them. I want you to do it and make it a ritual. Make it something that you do consistently. This will help you to also acknowledge that, hey, this is a new chapter in my life, but also it help you to practice the acceptance piece, which is crucial when it comes to overcoming grief. All right, so that's the first way. The second way, I want you guys to reflect on the advice that they gave you while they were alive. Now, what's awesome about this is that we want to take those values, we want to take everything that they've taught us, and we want to keep them. And you can keep them and actually pass them on to your kids, You could pass them on to your clients if you're a therapist like myself, or even if you're just in a helping profession. You can take the advice that they gave you and you can pass it on to others as a way to keep their memories alive. Listen, your loved one has poured into you greatly. There's things that they've taught you, whether it's directly or indirectly. And the best way to honor them is to let them know that their memory will be carried along in your actions. I've had clients that I've asked them, how can you manifest your actions by the advice that they've given you? I've had one client that comes to mind who lost their grandfather. And he basically told me he was this very wise guy. He was so wise that he could have been a therapist. And I asked him, do you ever speak with them? Do you ever ask yourself, what advice would you take? What advice would he give you that you can actually implement today? And he said, no, he's never thought about it. So one of the tasks that I gave him actually this week was to close his eyes and have this conversation with him and ask yourself, what advice would he give me when I tell him that I'm struggling with this thing, whatever it is? All right. This is how you can keep their lives alive, right? This is how you keep their memories alive. All right. So that's step number 2. And the third step, I want you guys to just constantly speak with them. Okay. Now you may be like, hey, like, how do I do that? What does that mean? Well, for my people that's spiritual, in your prayers, you can pray to the people that you've lost. When you go to the grave sites, you can speak to them as if they're still there. You can also do this by writing letters to them, right? Write letters to them as if they're living in another country, right? Right now, you can't see them, but eventually you will see them, right? Write letters as if that's the relationship you guys now have. By doing this, it helps you to, again, acknowledge that they have passed, but it helps you to keep their lives alive, right? Help you to keep their memories intact with you. So you can do this meditating, praying, verbally, writing, so many different ways, but continue to have that dialogue with them, and it'll help you to get through that grief. Main point number 4, and before I get into it, just a reminder, guys, hey, action takers are the people that make it far in life. Action takers are the people that are able to overcome things like grief. And if you're listening to this podcast right now, you are an action taker, and the way to do that is to actually subscribe to this channel. Subscribing to this channel, it helps you because these tips that I give are tips that normally I only share in therapy. But by being subscribed to this channel, you're guaranteed to get tips like this, and you don't have to spend a dime for them. Also, you may know someone that may be struggling with something like grief. And if that's the case, this podcast would be a great one to share with them. So go ahead, hit the subscribe button so you can have these gems in your back pocket. So with that being said, the fourth and final way to help you to overcome your grief is to avoid the recency bias. So what is the recency bias? Well, I always love using movies as an example of how the recency bias works. So there's a good chance you've watched a movie, and then maybe a few weeks later, you go back and you rewatch that movie. And when you rewatch that movie, I'm willing to bet that you forgot how it started. I'm willing to bet that you forgot the middle parts of that movie. And I'm also willing to bet that you remember how that movie ended. Now, why is that the case? Well, us as humans, we tend to only remember the last part of an event. And we see this a lot when it comes to movies, right? So let me ask, like, have you ever watched a movie and saw new things that you didn't remember seeing the first time? This may also happen when you read books as well. For me, it definitely does. I remember how books start, how they end, but sometimes I forget some gems in the middle, and that's why it's great to reread, highlight, and things like that. Well, here's the thing. When it comes to people passing, we have that same recency bias. We tend to only remember the last few days that the person was alive, the last few days where maybe they were going through excruciating pain, the last few days that we were actually taking care of them, right? You may have been the sole primary caretaker of the person that was passing. Or maybe you remember the last moment, right? When you finally got that call unexpectedly that your loved one has passed. A lot of us, that is the thing that we consume ourselves with. For you, that's probably the thing that you only focus on. And what that does is it does a disjustice to all of their life, right? Like what I mean is you're focused on the last, 3%, right, of their story. And what we fail to realize that there was this whole other part of them, right? This other 97% of their life that they lived that we have memories that we can look back on. So what I'm saying to you is I want you to focus on the entirety of their life, right? That summer vacation that maybe you guys spent together, right? That night that maybe you guys are outside going for a walk and it was just very, very meaningful because, it was an everyday thing, right? There's so many different memories you have of your loved one that you can think about and you can cherish. And right now, the biggest thing that you're doing that's a mistake is that you're just remembering the last few days. And this is why the recency bias is just something that we need to dismantle. So I want you to remember their entire story. So my challenge to you with that one is just to simply write down 10 of your favorite memories that you had with your loved one. And I say 10 because it's gonna really force you to stretch and think of all the good times that you guys had together. It doesn't have to be big. There may have been a night that you guys went to a restaurant that you never went to, and it was really, really great, right? And it was a great night, and you guys had fun. Something simple. I want you to do this because, again, their whole life is not, and it shouldn't be condensed to the last, let's say, 3% of their life, right? The last, if we're talking about it in terms of movie, like the last 10 minutes of that movie, right? There's so much more to them. So real quick, I'm going to summarize the 4 main steps to help you to overcome your grief. And the first way that I mentioned was to acknowledge your grief. And I gave you guys 3 ways to do that. Write a letter, speaking with a therapist, and going to their gravesite. The second way is to join a community. A lot of these communities are online. Facebook is a great place to start, but also you can meet these communities in person. All you got to do is do a Google search. The third way that I gave you is to honor their lives. Guys, just because they're gone, that doesn't mean that they have to be gone from your hearts or gone from your mind. You can still honor them in so many different ways. And then the fourth and final way was to avoid the recency bias. So what I'm saying here is that they had an entire life that they lived with you, decades, right? You've probably spent decades with this loved one. And what's happening right now is that you're only remembering the last week, the last 2 weeks that they were alive. You're doing a disservice to them and to you by just remembering that portion. So write down 10 memories, 10 of your best memories with that person, and use that as your foundation. Use that as something that you remember rather than the last painful moments of their life. So with that being said, my name is Coach Wells. Thank you for checking out this podcast.